Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Topo discussion tonight. We have invited a distinguished panel of experts in different areas of housing to join us tonight to explain Mayor Aragin's Topa proposal and to address questions that you may have. To clarify, this is not a City of Berkeley sponsored event. I thought, and Councilmember Kesarwani agreed, that the Topa proposal warranted a robust outreach effort to the community and that the complexity of the proposal warranted an explanation. This is solely an effort by the two of us and does not involve sponsorship of any other agencies or organizations. Our goal tonight is very straightforward. It's to try to educate as many residents, tenants, and property owners about the Topa ordinance. Our hope for this evening is that we can have a factual discussion and come away with a deeper understanding of the mayor's proposal. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a button that says Q&A. If you have a question, please push that button and write your question and submit. We will do our best to address your questions throughout the evening. And now I would like to introduce our panel. I'm Susan Wengraf, and I'm the moderator of tonight's event. I've served on the Berkeley City Council for 12 years, representing the Northeast Berkeley Hills. And I served prior to that on the Berkeley Planning Commission for 18 years and have a strong interest in land use policy and planning. And I'll be moderating tonight. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Rashi Kesarwani. Councilmember Kesarwani represents District 1, which encompasses the northwestern section of Berkeley. She holds a Master of Public Policy from UC Berkeley, and her professional background is in nonpartisan budget and policy analysis for state and local governments. Joining us from Washington, D.C., and Scott, if you can raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Okay, thank you. Scott Bruton develops policy and advocacy positions on affordable housing and homelessness prevention issues. Scott has served organizations working for social justice and community development for over 2 decades and became an expert in the District of Columbia's housing policies and assisted several dozen tenant organizations through the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act process. He also produced a national study of opportunity to purchase programs for the city of Minneapolis. And thank you, Scott, for joining us tonight. Mary Murtaugh. Mary, could you give a hi? Yeah, thanks. Mary has a long and successful history as an affordable housing developer and advocate. She served as the president and CEO of EAH for 33 years. Under Mary's leadership, EAH completed its 8,000 affordable housing units, including 2,000 that EAH acquired to save from conversion to market rate. Mary has been honored with Lifetime Achievement Awards by both the Nonprofit Housing Association for the Bay Area and the statewide California Housing Consortium, and is a member of the Marin's Women's Hall of Fame. John Gutierrez. John Gutierrez is a land use attorney and business attorney with more than 30 years experience specializing in property acquisitions and sales, real estate finance, joint ownerships like condominiums, co-ops, and co-housing, and tax-deferred exchanges. His practice is located in West Berkeley. And finally, Linnell Bevels. Linnell is committed to financial literacy and has partnered with many community organizations over the years to bring home ownership and responsible lending to many communities throughout the Bay Area. She has been helping individuals with specialized home financing solutions in order to purchase, refinance, or renovate their homes for more than 3 decades. Linnell has extensive knowledge about the current landscape of down payment assistance programs, VA, FHA, and renovation lending, representing just a few niche programs offering to assist for first-time home buyers. Each of our panelists will have about 5 minutes to answer a specific question based on their area of expertise to help us understand Topa. And if we are efficient, we will likely have time for additional questions. So let's get started. Councilmember Kesarwani will now give us an overview of the mayor's proposed Topa ordinance.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Wengraf, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking time out of their evening to join us. I'm going to first share my screen, so if you'll just bear with me a moment. Okay, that's visible. You can, Councilmember Wengraf, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I wanted to just level set because we have so many people joining us, and not everyone may know what the mayor's proposal is. So I want to just give this very high level overview. I will try to do this as efficiently as possible. I do not want to take more than 10 minutes so we can hear from our panelists and answer as many audience questions as we can. And I do just want to explain that we wanted to have the mayor here to speak to his proposal, but there is a rule known as the Brown Act. And under the Brown Act, council members have to be careful about who they speak to with regards to specific council items. And so it was the city attorney's advice that it was safest for the mayor not to join us tonight, but we are recording this webinar, and we do hope that the mayor will watch and hear community questions. And of course, there will be future opportunities to hear from the mayor directly on the proposal, and I'll speak to that at the end of my presentation. So I want to begin by first talking about the mayor's policy rationale for the proposed Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act ordinance. There are many different sections of the ordinance, and I've tried to link to it actually at the very bottom of the page if folks are interested in later going and looking at the ordinance. You know, I'd encourage you to look at it so you can understand it in more detail than I'll be able to go into right now. But in the findings section of the ordinance at the beginning, there are a number of issues that are laid out, and I think two of the key policy issues that are presented are the issues of affordable housing preservation and creation of affordable housing, and the concern for displacement of low-income tenants in particular. So those are really the two key reasons for the mayor's proposed Topa ordinance. So how does it work? If a rental property owner decides to sell a property, they first have to do something known as a notice of intent to sell. And what that means is that they have to notify their tenants that they are intending to sell. And I apologize, that's my son has entered the room, but he should be out soon. So I hope you'll bear with me. He's okay, we're okay now. So the property owner is going to provide that notice of intent to sell to the tenants and to what are called qualified nonprofits in the ordinance. So what is a qualified nonprofit? It is an organization that is authorized to acquire and manage affordable housing. And the city manager, in the ordinance, it's proposed that the city manager will maintain a list of who these qualified nonprofits are. So that's really the initial step. And there is a notice period with this intent to sell. And, you know, we've noted here, there's 20 days for smaller properties and 45 days for larger properties. And that's really the time for a tenant or multiple tenant households to determine if they have an interest in purchasing the property. So before we get into that, you know, you may be wondering which properties are subject to Topa pursuant to the proposed ordinance. So there is a list, it's actually a pretty lengthy list of exemptions in the ordinance. And so I just want to call attention to some of the key exemptions and some of the key types of living arrangements and circumstances that are subject to TOPA. So I'm going to start with single family homes. If your single family home is owner occupied, or you have an owner who is in an accessory dwelling unit on that property with a rented single family home, that circumstance is going to be exempt from TOPA. So if you decide to sell your single family home, you would not go through the TOPA process with the notice of intent to sell. Any rental property with units that are quote unquote entirely owner occupied would be exempted. Co-ops are listed, government owned property, and a number of other types of property that I won't fully list now. And then there are certain transfers of legal title that are exempted. One example is a transfer of legal title to a family member. And then there is, an exemption for properties of 5 units or less when the owner or immediate family member has quote unquote imminently necessary healthcare expenses to be determined by a administrative process that has yet to be determined but is noted in the ordinance. So what's not exempted from the ordinance? A rented single family home is not exempted, and rental property of any size where the units are not entirely owner occupied, that would also be exempted, or excuse me, not exempted. Okay, so now I am trying to see if I can get through this, and this is the real meaty slide here, and I don't want to bore everybody by getting too deep into this because I know I've already talked at length, but the key point here is that if you are subject to TOPA, there is a process that you have to go through beyond the initial notice period. So there is a right of first offer that the tenants are entitled to. And if the tenants, through a tenant organization or a majority of the tenants, or a qualified nonprofit that the tenants have assigned their rights to, issue a statement of interest, that adds more time to the sale process here. And the property owner is free to accept or reject that first offer that is made. And if the property owner chooses to accept the offer, then there is a period, periods of time that are listed here and, very clearly laid out in the ordinance for closing on that offer. But it's very possible that, the property owner may wish to go to the market, as is currently the practice, in absence of a TOPA ordinance. And that's why I have a for sale sign here to sort of demarcate that you may choose to reject that first offer and go to the market and seek a, quote unquote, third party purchaser. And so then you may receive, probably your highest and best offer from a third party purchaser. And that's where we get to something known as the right of first refusal. So that gives the tenant organization or the qualified nonprofit a period of time to determine whether they wish to match that offer, essentially. And so there's time to consider that offer. And then if that offer is accepted by the property owner, then you would sort of go back to this time that's allowed for the closure. So that's really it in a nutshell. So I want to, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on, and I know we'll get questions about that process, and we will do our best to answer those as we go through. So I just want to acknowledge that there are other pieces to implementing the proposed TOPA ordinance, and there are other sections of the ordinance that get at those issues. One is the issue of funding. That is actually not in the ordinance itself, but I want to acknowledge that the mayor prepared a background report that talked about the need for a minimum of $10 to $15 million in city funding to enable property acquisition by qualified nonprofits. And I pulled out here on the right a section from the mayor's report to give our audience and all of us a sense of what is contemplated in terms of city subsidies, private capital of tenants, loans from community-oriented banks, in order to leverage both private and public financing. And I know Ms. Bevels will be able to talk about that in more detail when we get to the panel. There's an affordability section that properties that are acquired with city funds will be subject to an affordability restriction. And that's where I think there's a connection with the findings and the desire to create and preserve affordable housing. I mentioned during my discussion of the exemptions at the outset, this possibility of being exempted from Topa for imminent healthcare expenses. That rule and other rules are going to require administrative regulations that are developed by our city manager. And, there is an acknowledgement that has come out, I believe, in land use policy committees by a committee of our council, that there will be new staff that will be required to implement and ensure that the ordinance is being applied fairly and accurately. And then there is also enforcement that is mentioned in the ordinance in terms of civil legal action that is possible, or the potential of civil penalties up to $1,000 a day. So with that, I was almost at 10 minutes. I think I went a little bit over, but I just wanted to say that, this presentation may have raised more questions perhaps than it answered. And, that's, fully understandable. I want to acknowledge that, we couldn't have the mayor here, but you are welcome to email the mayor directly. And we have his email address here. He or a member of his staff will be able to respond to you. You can also share your input with the whole council, council@cityofberkeley.info. And then one thing I did want to note, and we will try to remind folks of this at the end as well, that the Land Use Policy Committee is currently hearing this issue. It's before this policy committee, and their next meeting where they will be discussing this ordinance is next Thursday, May 20th, beginning at 10:30 a.m. I have a shortened link here if folks want to write that down. That will take you to the Land Use Policy Committee page where you can find the Zoom link, which actually it may not be posted just yet, or it may have been posted. It'll be posted soon if it's not already. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Councilmember Wengraf.
Well, thank you so much, Councilmember Kesarwani. This is a complex proposal, and we don't expect everybody to get it on the first round. There are the devil's in the details, but hang in there with us, and hopefully by the end of this panel discussion, you will have a better idea of what's being proposed. So we know that Washington, D.C. has had a Topa ordinance for about 40 years now. And I'd like to turn to Scott Bruton and wonder if you could describe to us what policy objectives was Topa intended to address in DC, and what have been the results, and what have been the benefits and the drawbacks. You're muted. You're muted.
Sure. That's a big question. So ever since, so the district created its first opportunity to purchase program when it got home rule in 1975, and then it expanded it with the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act in 1980. And since 1980, the goals of Topa have been several. They've been to prevent community displacement, give tenants more of a say in what happens when to their community when a property they live in is sold, to encourage homeownership, to encourage the creation of affordable housing, to give tenants increased bargaining power with their landlord when their property is up for sale. And yes, that's a lot. And so there are all kinds of different perspectives as to which one or which of the several are the primary purposes of TOPA, but those were all envisioned from the start. TOPA should be understood in the district in combination with a few other laws that were passed back in 1975 and a few years afterward. And those are just cause eviction, rent stabilization or rent control, as well as restrictions on condo conversion. So that only landlords can only convert a building to condo if a majority of the tenants are in favor of that. And so those kind of all work together to prevent displacement and to help give tenants more stability. And so for a significant portion of the past 40 plus years with TOPA, just providing tenants with the rights to have a say in the disposition of their property provided significant value in preventing displacement. But also there were many tenants that decided to convert to a condominium and buy in that way to have ownership. And then there were also many limited equity cooperatives, which is a limited or shared equity model for homeownership that were created in the decades after 1980. There was also always some form of local or federal funding that was used to assist tenants in the creation of limited equity cooperatives, as well as to assist tenants when they assign their right to a developer to create affordable housing. But tenants have also had the right to make other choices, to pick a development option that would benefit their community, but would not necessarily create affordable housing. And beginning in the early 2000s, the district started creating a variety of financing and funding options to help increase the amount of affordable housing that was created. Everything from our Housing Production Trust Fund to a local rent supplement program, which is like HUD's Housing Choice Vouchers, which helps with the creation of housing for households at 0 to 30% of the area median income. I can go on if you'd like, trying to be sensitive to your many questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I'd like to move over to Linnell Bevels. Some of us in the audience, I believe, have never purchased property before or only have the experience of purchasing a single family home. And I wondered if you could explain what happens if a client comes to you with an interest in purchasing a 1 to 4 unit building, let's say. And also, what can you explain to us some common forms of interest or ownership among more than one household? In other words, if several people wanted to buy a property together.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so good evening. And let's see, let me see if I can cover all that fairly quickly. If someone came to me in reference to a purchase of a 1 to 4 family, and they were interested in the least amount of down payment out of pocket, depending on the purchase price, I might recommend a product referred to as FHA. It's the Federal Housing Administration. FHA is a program that's been around, I don't know, since the 60s. It's a longstanding program. It's, you know, Mary's shaking her head. Yeah, it's a beloved program, or it's become a beloved program. And what's wonderful about the program is that it allows a buyer to purchase a 1 to 4 family. That's a single family, a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, and utilize a low down payment option, which is 3.5%. It's a really big deal. 3.5% down is a nice option. The loan is insured by the government, and because of that, there's a lot of flexibility in a person's ability to qualify. As an example, many of the other programs that are conforming, conventional types products that we hear about in the news all the time, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, those products. Those programs require larger down payments as well as much higher credit scores. And so FHA, in a lot of cases, if you have a 620 credit score, which is not great credit, but it's not bad credit either. You may have perfect credit, but a lot of it, and therefore your credit score might be at 620. But FHA allows you to purchase, up to their maximum limits, which for the calendar year of 2021 is $822,450. All of this you can Google, $822,450. So that as a point is that if the property is above, the single family residence is above the $822,450, then the FHA product may not be an option for you. However, the duplex, the triplex, and the fourplex, they all have much higher loan limits under the FHA product, depending on the county. Well, we're talking about Berkeley and the state of California. So they have different loan limits, but yeah, the point is that you could put down 3.5%. You don't have to have perfect credit. You don't have to have perfect job stability. You do have to have a job. You do have to verify that your income is ongoing. And there are some other down payment assistance programs that can be paired with the FHA product, which is also a win for a number of first-time home buyers. And I'll name two. One is the Golden State Financing Authority, GSFA, Golden State Financing Authority. It's an opportunity where you can get either between 2% of the loan amount up to 7% of the loan amount in down payment assistance. And so hypothetically, if we're talking about a $700,000 loan amount times, we'll say 4%, that's a $28,000 down payment assistance from Golden State Financing Authority, which in some cases, it is a grant and is forgiven after 3 years. So there's opportunity for persons to purchase. And then the other is the California Housing Finance Authority, which is a state program. And that program, they have a couple of opportunities, but it's a 3% down payment assistance. Again, 3% down payment assistance. I'll use the same example, a $700,000 loan amount. 3% would be a $21,000 down payment assistance. The difference in the two programs is that Golden State Financing Authority has a lower credit score requirement than CalHFA. CalHFA wants you to have like a 660, 680, where you can have a 640 or a 660 in the other. And then in terms of the co-ownership question, Susan, in this situation, if you are purchasing a duplex, not so much a single family, because a single family, if it's a rental property, non-occupied, it's not occupied by the landlord, that's subject to Topa, and that's just one single person purchasing. So that would be sole ownership, sole occupancy. If you're purchasing a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, the idea is that there are likely other tenants in the other units who may also be interested in purchasing. And so there's an opportunity to co-own where 2 to 3 people purchase together. And it just means that all parties' income will be considered in the purchase. All parties' credit will be considered in the overall qualifications. And then there's some things that you want to really consider, like how are we going to hold title? All of this information you can Google, but how are you going to hold title? That's really important. It's definitely something that you want to talk to, an attorney about. However, as a general rule, if you are purchasing with a non-related person and or a cousin, right, not your spouse, you might consider a tenants in common vesting because that allows you to have, let's say, you can decide of the 2 unit, I want to have 50% ownership and I want the other person to have 50% ownership. Well, in a triplex, you may want a third and a third and a third. And with tenants in common, you have the opportunity to do that. Other vesting vehicles don't necessarily allow that to the degree that tenancy in common does. But I'm sure that John can speak on that because that is his sandbox. And so hopefully I've answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a perfect segue to John.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Linnell. So John, what kind of legal challenges face homeowners that purchase property jointly? And is there anything in the ordinance, the Topa ordinance, that joint owners might want to be aware of?
Yes, thank you. So piggybacking on a little bit of what Linnell said, generally, if multiple parties are going to purchase property, they're either going to acquire it as individuals collectively, either as what's called tenants in common, or depending on the familiarity of the group, they might hold title as joint tenants. Alternatively, if they're not going to hold title as individuals, and this is putting aside trusts that own property, they might own it as an entity, as a corporation, as a partnership, or as a limited liability company. The principal differences between an entity ownership and I'm just going to generalize, an individual ownership is generally some entities provide personal liability protection, limited liability companies and corporations. There are exceptions to those rules. General partnerships do not provide that sort of protection. People that hold title as tenants in common and those that hold title as joint tenants potentially face personal liability issues. And the things that we're talking about are all interrelated. Linnell, the programs that you've identified, I presume, would not allow for an entity applicant. And then there's a question of whether or not individuals that acquire title as individuals can subsequently transfer their ownership interests collectively to an entity without triggering an acceleration of the loan or an immediate calling of the loan as due. So how you hold title poses some potential liability issues. As I tell most clients, no matter how you hold title, insurance is going to be important, and more insurance and more insurance often is the answer. So does that answer?
John.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm now moving to Mary. Mary, you have such a very impressive history of creating affordable housing. I wonder if you could address alternatives to Topa for permanent affordability and for preventing displacement.
Well, sort of classic affordable housing, which is the nonprofits like EAH Housing do, is really not relevant to this situation because we would never be developing or acquiring very small properties just because the economics of it are too difficult to work. The reason being that we really focus on housing very low income, extremely low income people, and in many cases, people who are experiencing homelessness. And we do that by assembling a lot of state subsidies. So I was asked to be on this, but my expertise is really kind of, separate from what the workshop is considering, although the organization I used to run is dedicated to social equity and permanent affordability. It doesn't really answer your question. So if you want to re-ask it, feel free.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to go to the Q&A and ask some questions that have been submitted by our attendees. And one of the questions, and after I read it out loud, I'll assign it to one of you. If the property has been owner occupied and now the owner has been moved into assisted living or has moved out to facilitate getting the property ready, is the property still considered owner occupied or does it default to the sitting tenant? This is a very specific question about the ordinance. And let's see, Rashi, do you feel prepared to address it?
I I will attempt to answer. So I know I already said this, that this is the mayor's proposal. So I want to be careful, and I also don't want to infer anything. I think what this question is really asking is if the property is vacant, if I understand correctly, is it subject to TOPA? And when I look at the list of exemptions, actually there is no language about how a vacant property should be treated. So I think that that is an area where we need to gain more clarity on that.
And John, I know you spent a lot of time going over the ordinance. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. I think it's an important point to clarify. The rent board has opined on the matter in their context. There's state law that raises this issue, and often there's disagreements among different jurisdictions. But the other scenario that I would add is not only the owner who leaves because of healthcare reasons, but owners that pass away and the property is left to their estate to dispose of. And so there's a question of whether or not there's a grace period after one of these events occurs and the property would still be treated as owner occupied, or on the day that the person leaves, is that automatically no longer an owner occupied property and therefore disqualified as an exemption?
Okay, thank you. We've asked for some clarity. We've been asked for some clarity on the timeline. I wonder, Rashi, if you could put up that slide again and we could walk. I think everybody is very concerned about the timeline, and I know that it's complex because there are different number of days that apply to different housing types. For example, single family is X number of days and 1 to 5 units is another period of time, and larger properties are even longer. So let's take a look at the timeline again. So the initial, Rashi, you want to go through this?
Sure. So I think that it is a very important question. I know we're getting that question from a number of people in the Q&A, and someone was asking, what's the maximum timeline? And it really depends on the size of the property, because as you're seeing here, smaller properties tend to have shorter timelines as they go through this process. So, we could come up with a longest timeline that would be applicable for, as you can see here at the bottom, 20 plus unit properties will get 60 days plus the possibility of requesting 2 30-day extensions. So that's 120 days. If a majority of tenants in that property, in that rental property express a statement of interest. So that is a lot longer than 60 days for less than 10 units. And these timelines are also driven by, whether you get to the next stage. It's possible that you have the initial notice period and there is no statement of interest. And so then your timeline, is not as lengthy as if you end up having a majority of tenants who are interested or a qualified nonprofit who is interested in making an offer. So we can do more work. What I'm hearing is people want to be able to see quickly, different possibilities on the timelines. And so we can make a bar chart of some kind so that people could see that for various situations and various property sizes. But this is giving you a general idea that the timeline would be extended, in some cases by several months because of just the number of days associated with each step.
So my reading of it is that for a large property, it could actually be almost a year. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. But in any case, I think if we could do the bar chart, that would be great for people. And in the meantime, I'll move on to a question for Scott about what happened in DC. I know there's been some reporting of tenants extorting small property owners to relinquish Topa rights. And I wondered if you could address that and how DC handled that situation.
Sure.
The other way around.
Oh, sorry, what did you say?
No, I think it's the other way around, right? Owners extorting tenants.
No, well, as with anything in the real estate market, real estate is not populated by a lot of angels. It's a sharp elbows, rough and tumble business, and even on the good guys' side, and you know, don't have any illusions otherwise. So that said, what I think you're referring to is back in, I guess it was 2017, 2018-ish, there was a particular lawyer who decided he saw an opportunity in single family Topa. And what his angle was, sorry, I have to choose my language carefully. In discussions with his clients, he encouraged them to register for their Topa rights and to run out the clock as long as possible by meeting certain requirements, and to then ask the owner of the property to give them a buyout to leave in order to move the process along quicker. Now, I'll say that by the time that happened, single family Topa in the district had been going along for almost 40 years. And this is an individual, and I think there was a TV station in the district that picked this up, and it got the attention of some of the council members. And there was they brought together some stakeholders, both tenant advocates as well as the local Realtors Association. And I was involved in this, and we negotiated for several months to come up with amendments to the single family Topa part of the process to cut off this opportunity that this particular lawyer was engaging in. And I think the committee report that went with the legislation said that they had documented 6 cases of this that had happened. So this wasn't really prevalent. And when we were close to consensus on this and held a hearing to move on to adopt the bill, the council chairman, who was in a contested election that year, decided to exercise his persuasive ability to put his thumb on the scale to almost eliminate single family Topa. It's still eligible. It's still there for elderly and disabled tenants. I can go into details more if you'd like. And so
I have I'm sorry,
sure,
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I have a question because, as Mary said, most affordable housing focuses on larger buildings because there's an economy of scale that works in the tenant's favor. Why would you focus Topa on single family housing?
That is an excellent question. One thing I'd like to point out, and this gets to your earlier question about timelines, and that is that, the current real estate system is set up in a way that is advantageous to folks who have cash on hand. Say, for example, hedge funds, or like Blackstone, I guess has been in the news a lot, buying up single family homes all across the country and removing them from the home ownership opportunities and turning them into rental properties. And what it does is, because they're able to pay cash immediately and close very quickly because they do everything, legal everything in-house, what it means is that the average home buyer, whether they're the tenant or just someone looking to buy a home, it just can't compete with them. And that's why they've been able to accumulate so much property. And so while yes, these timelines do add a bit to what the normal process is, it levels the playing field a little bit for folks who aren't cash wealthy and don't have a stable of lawyers behind them. And so whether it's for a single family house or for, like a 4, 20 or 100 unit building, these extra timelines allow folks who may need more different types of financing. So Mary would be familiar with this. The stack of financing is much more complex in affordable housing, and it takes longer to put that together. And so so for larger buildings, this allows affordable housing developers the time to put that stack together to be able to compete with all cash buyers. Same thing with single family. And then, as Mary alluded to, there are different types of developers that target different size properties. And so you have everything from, a single family, that wants to move into a house, to someone who may be trying to buy a house to start renting it, to, increase their retirement savings or something like that, to Blackstone that wants to create an empire of single family rentals. And then, yes, and then, and so different, and just as Linnell mentioned, there are different types of financing products for these different sizes of housing. And so single family mortgage is not going to work for a 2 to 4 unit property, but these other types of financing vehicles will. And just as certain types of financing won't work for a 20 unit building, assistance from the local government, or doing something like creating a LIHTC pool, where normally you couldn't, people didn't used to use LIHTC for properties, a low-income housing tax credit for properties under 75 units or so. Now people are putting together 20-unit properties, multiple 20-unit properties to put together in a LIHTC pool to take advantage of that federal financing. And so
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt
please do.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm going to piggyback on your question and ask John, and maybe Linnell wants to chime in about how do these timelines affect property owners who want to use tax-deferred like 1031 exchanges. How will these timelines impact their ability to do that? John?
Yes, so the timeline is very important. And I would say in order to gain at least understanding, if not acceptability, one of the things that has to be made clear in this ordinance is specifically what are those timelines and when do they cut off. Currently, the way the ordinance is written, it seems that because of the interchangeability of different participants, whether it's tenants organizations, or qualified nonprofits, that time period can expand, and then there is additional time for the closing to actually occur. A tax-deferred exchange, or a Internal Revenue Code section 1031 exchange, is a means by which owners can sell property that they use for investment purposes or as part of their business or trade. They can defer paying the income tax on that property by trading into other similar investment or trade or business property. The thing that is most peculiar and touchy about a 1031 exchange is that in order to properly do an exchange, you have to meet 2 very important time limits. And if you miss those time limits, you jeopardize the exchange and potentially you wind up paying income tax. Those 2 limits those 2 clocks, as it were, begin to run from the closing of the sale of what's called the relinquished property, the original property. An owner has 45 days from the sale to identify up to 3 properties that the owner thinks it may acquire in order to use up the funds that it obtains from the sale. So 45 days, an owner has to identify a particular property or properties. The way things exist in the real estate market today, anybody who is caught flat-footed, not having already identified replacement property, which is what the property you trade into is called. If you haven't identified replacement property, by the time you are closing escrow on your relinquished property, you are risking that you will not be able to identify replacement properties because the market is so hot. Once you identify the properties, and again, these 2 clocks start to run at the same time, there is a 180-day time limit to closing on the property or properties that you have identified as replacement properties. So coming back to Topa, it's very important that it be clear both to sellers who are doing tax-deferred exchange and, very importantly, to purchasers of property who are looking for their replacement property to know that they're going to be able to meet the time limits. And at the moment, I think there's a lack of clarity around that issue.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mary, did you want to add to that?
I would love to. I think the your description of the tax exempt exchanges is very helpful. And the way that the timelines work on this and the fact that they're fungible would seem to me completely precludes that, at least based on my limited experience with it. But I actually wanted to go at a slightly different tack and just mention to Scott that I had the opportunity to listen to a terrific presentation that listed just recently that focused on what DC has done in this and the long history. And as you mentioned, all the various types of support that the city itself provides financially to accomplish this goal. And it's a terrific program. It's evolved over many years, starting with tenants organizing because they had serious problems with slumlords and not getting any water or heat all winter. And I mean, really appalling conditions. So it makes you extremely sympathetic, but at the same time, although I think the city's goals are very admirable, I think this is a complicated proposal and needs to be thought through incredibly well. I'm reading the statute. I see it's been amended multiple times, but I, personally, just as a citizen of Berkeley, would love to see people step back and examine the underlying premises. And we've already learned a tremendous amount in this session about possible financing from Linnell, which is great. That there's opportunities that are available, but other sorts of support that are provided in DC are to co-ops in the form of nonprofits that act as advisors to if residents choose to go the limited equity co-op route. Scott, you would know about this. There's groups that are available to help advise tenants in how to run basically what is a business. And I certainly know a lot about that angle of ownership of housing and how you have to budget ahead of time, to cover maintenance in order to ensure that the property is going to maintain its worth, et cetera. It's not simple. And, that there's a wide variety of people who would love to own these properties, some of whom may have the background to be able to do this effectively and others who won't, who could really benefit from having that type of assistance. And I don't know how deeply that's been explored yet, but Scott, I know you have a ton of expertise in this area. One of our former staff members at EAH spent a good 15 years building co-ops in multiple states before he joined EAH. And his conclusion, when I asked him to explore it, he said, don't do that. And I said, why? And he said, well, I have so much experience with the boards of co-ops being profoundly dysfunctional. And they're not all that way. He cited several where the owners all had good backgrounds in business administration, running their own businesses or otherwise, and everything ran like a Swiss watch. But he cited an equal number where the boards were just basically taken over by people who wanted to muscle other people aside and would do horrible things such as allow people who were doing really serious criminal acts to remain in the building.
Mary, I'm gonna interrupt you. We have, believe it or not, we have 69 questions in the queue.
Oh, okay, I'm done. Just wanted to raise the fact that there can be serious issues with this. And I think, in addition to the impacts on sellers, we really need to think this out, as a community carefully so we end up with a great result.
Thank you.
Rather than missions.
Yeah. Okay, very simple question. How is the value of the property determined? Are there appraisals that are required? Who does the appraisal? Scott, do you want to, in Washington, how is it done?
Oh, well, in Washington, it's this, and I think it's the same way in how it's set in Berkeley. The value is set either by what the owner of the property is willing to accept. I know you all have the right of first offer, and that's when the tenants will make an offer of an amount, and the owner has the right to say yay or nay to that. And then for your right of first refusal, and same thing here in the district, a third, like bidding by third parties establishes the price and the material terms of the contract. And so in an opportunity to purchase program, it's either the willingness of the owner to accept a price, which that's the market, or bidding by third parties, which also the market, establishes the price, terms, and conditions. And so it's not done through an appraisal, or there's no price setting or anything
Okay, so I'm going to follow up with another question. So if the tenants give up their rights and it falls to a nonprofit, and the nonprofit can't meet the price, they can't put the financing together, and it goes on the open market, and the owner reduces the price in order to sell it quickly. He's now lost several months, and he reduces the price. Is he liable in that case because it's been offered to the tenants at one price, and then the price is lowered after they give up their claim?
I can tell you in DC that if a price is lowered more than 10% in the district, then they have to issue a new Topa notice to prevent, for lack of a better phrase, shill buyers, creating fictive value. And I think, if I remember reading your law bill correctly, that if they reduce the price, I think that there would have to be a new offer.
So the clock starts ticking again.
That I can't test.
Okay, I believe the clock, Rashi, can you confirm that the clock would start ticking again if a new Topa offer was put into play?
Could you clarify what you mean by a new Topa offer?
So the first, you tell your tenants, I'm interested in selling. This is the price. Let's just make up a hypothetical price. For a 4-unit building, $3 million. Okay. The tenants, they have their meetings and nobody's interested in buying it. It falls to the nonprofit housing developer. The nonprofit housing developer is interested, but they can't put the financing together. So they give up their claim as well.
Well, Susan, Councilmember Wengraf, let me just stop you there, because the ordinance requires the tenants to assign their rights to the qualified nonprofit, and it has to be a majority of the tenants who do that. So your example is a 4-unit building, 3 of the tenant households would have to assign to that qualified nonprofit. So in that example, maybe it's not the greatest, because it seems like these tenants, if they were not interested, would not choose to engage the qualified nonprofit. But
okay, it's a 6-unit building. It doesn't matter.
So you're saying, but you were saying it's if the qualified nonprofit makes an offer.
The qualified nonprofit can't get the financing to purchase the building at the price at which it's been listed.
Okay.
Okay. And they give up their claim. Now the owner can put the property on the open market. But he's lost so much time, or she's lost so much time at this point, that she wants to get rid of the property quickly. So she lowers the price. Now, what Scott is saying is, in Washington, D.C., there's a clause that says, if the price is reduced more than 10%, you have to make a new offer to the tenants.
So in our ordinance, the way it works, just reading the plain language of it, you've gotten a lower offer, 2.8 million, let's say. It's not 3 million anymore. You want to accept that offer. You do have to go back to the tenants, because they have the right of first refusal, not just the right of excuse me, the right of first offer. So the tenants can then determine, do they want to reconsider at that lower price?
Exactly.
They have time, and they may choose to, and then they will get more time, or they may decline, and the the property owner would be able to engage that third party purchaser at 2.8 million then.
Okay, but in order for the tenant to exercise that first right, I believe the clock has to start ticking again in the second round. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's just a question. John, do you?
I believe that's right. I've been looking through the ordinance, trying to find the specific language. There's a section.
Rashi, it was on your, the screenshot that you had of all the timelines. It actually spoke to when you get to the situation where you have a third party making their offer, the owner has to circle back to the tenant or the housing agency to find out, hey, are you interested in this? Because you have first right of refusal. And the timeline was kind of referenced on the slide that Rashi.
Yeah, so that's what I just described and spoke to. I believe what Councilmember Wengraf is asking is, do you somehow have to go to the very beginning? And I don't see anything in the ordinance that suggests you have to go back to a notice of intent to sell. If you you've gone to the market, you have an offer, you do have to do that right of first refusal though. I think you may be getting at, Councilmember Wengraf, perhaps a period of time has elapsed where maybe you took your property off the market, you stopped thinking about selling it at all because of whatever reasons, and then maybe you want to return to selling it. I think that's maybe the question, where how much time can elapse before you can engage in that next step, which is a right of first refusal. Or if a certain period of time elapses, do you have to go back to right of first offer to the tenants? That is not addressed in the current version of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
The ordinance says that if an owner rejects or if a qualified organization doesn't make a purchase offer or fails to close, then the owner may immediately proceed with the sale to a third-party purchaser. I think that's the only context where I've seen where it talks about what happens when everybody else falls away.
Yeah, so that is speaking to the issue of the tenants failing to close, the tenant organization or the qualified nonprofit.
Right. Where there's
only.
a third-party offer, right.
Right.
Okay. Okay, question for Scott. What evidence is there that Topa has increased affordable housing? Do you have data? Is there data available from the program in Washington about how many Topa transactions there have been and how long they've been and all of that? Is there data available?
The district does not track Topa outcomes because Topa has many different purposes, and its main purpose is not necessarily to create affordable housing. The district does not track that. That said, for example, our Housing Production Trust Fund, which we've had for over a decade, it gives money to both new construction projects and preservation projects. And most preservation projects, existing structures, have gone through the Topa process. And they've either decided to convert to a limited equity cooperative, or they've decided to continue rental and pursue maintaining affordability or deepening affordability. And it's usually around about half of the projects each RFP cycle for the trust fund that are preservation projects. And so, yes, many Topa projects have gone the route of preserving or creating affordable housing. That said, other tenant groups have decided not to pursue that.
Is there a reason why the Washington, D.C. isn't tracking this? It would seem to me to be very valuable information.
I don't work for the city, so I can't, I don't know the history of why back in the 1980s they didn't decide to track this, or why they didn't decide to track it in following years.
Okay, thank you.
I think the average size in Washington, if you look at the total number of buildings and total units, is about 40 units a building. So it's pretty big scale. I'm all in favor of taking profiteering corporations to the cleaners, but this seems to be such a long, complicated timeline. And just in listening to the description of it, the interest rates could be up 2 points by the time the owner finally gets the opportunity to sell. So I don't have a dog in this fight personally. I'm in a totally different industry, but I just think it would be important for the city to balance the incentives to the owners as well as to the residents, recognizing that there's value in both sides. We don't want to drive people who manage rental property out of the city screaming for help.
I can offer a little context on Mary's point. The district has longer timelines for its Topa process than what Berkeley is proposing. And we are one of the hottest housing markets, both single family and multifamily in the country. And also on top of that, like I said, we've been doing this for 40 years. And so as with the housing market is heavily regulated wherever you go. And housing markets tend to adapt to changes in regulations. And so the district has demonstrated over the past 40 years that the market adapts to the changes in timelines.
Scott, I have a question about, since we're so fortunate to have you here and we can, grill you about Washington, D.C., which we've heard so much about. Are there settlement attorneys that handle property transactions in Washington, D.C.? And do you foresee attorneys playing a key role in all rental property sales going forward if Topa is approved here in Berkeley?
I will say that I think with or without Topa, there are settlement attorneys involved in every transaction for a rental or ownership property. You have your titling insurance folks, you have your agents and brokers, and this applies for everyone from buying a single family house to live in it as an owner on up to properties with several thousand units. Nobody acts as, like their own representative and all those things. Everybody who engages in the real estate market has many helpers, and those helpers are kind of multiplied depending on the size of your endeavor and the complexity of your financing. But it doesn't really change the dynamics. Yes, tenants will still require the expertise of these folks, just as they would if they were buying either as a developer or a single family homeowner. And that kind of technical advice is absolutely key in a Topa city or a non-Topa city.
Okay, thank you. And John, do you think that this will increase transaction costs associated with rental property sales? Attorney's fees, title insurance, or associated costs?
The short answer is yes. And let me just address something that Scott said. In some states and perhaps in the district, the bar associations have more lobbying clout than in California. In those states, lawyers run closings. In California, we use escrows and title companies. So we don't have settlement attorneys in the same way, but there will be ancillary effects, I believe, beginning with a conversation like we're having today. People will have questions, buyers will have questions, sellers will have questions. Real estate agents and brokerages are going to have a lot of questions because this potentially increases their liability. The amount of due diligence that buyers will have to do, lenders will do, agents will do, will go up. And as I've said before, if there's uncertainty, or we need more certainty in order to allay some of these concerns. Additionally, some lenders in complex transactions require legal opinions from attorneys. And a legal opinion is basically an attorney putting their neck on the line, not only to their client, but to whomever is receiving the legal opinion, typically a lender, and potentially being sued if it turns out that their legal opinion had holes in it. Legal opinions are expensive. Counseling all the different parties for the issues, the procedures, the protocols, the risks, and the potential liability in these transactions, at least for the first few years, I would imagine, is going to be higher than ordinarily is the case. I mean, I don't know exactly what the percentages are, but I would hazard to guess that the amount of transactions of the type that we're discussing where lawyers are immediately and directly involved is a low percentage of all transactions. We get involved when there are problems, when somebody's refusing to close, when there are title issues, when there are odd lender issues. But I think in this instance, I hate to say it, but it will be sort of full employment for real estate attorneys for a while.
Thank you, John. Mary, did you want to say something? I see you're highlighted. Did you want to speak?
No, I don't have my hand up, but I'm sure there's something I wanted to say.
No, that's okay. If you don't want to speak, that's fine. I want to ask Linnell a question about financing, because that's your area of expertise. With housing prices being, the median sale price of a house in Berkeley, single family house in Berkeley, is now 1.4 million. Houses are selling for more than $1,000 per square foot. What kind of income does somebody need to have to qualify for a loan of, let's say, $1 million or more than $1 million?
That's a very loaded question, Susan. It's not really a question that I can answer definitively. I actually just had this conversation with someone. It may have been Kieran at the board. I'll give you an example. Two friends have the same income. Let's say they make $200,000 a year. One friend qualifies to buy $1.5 million. The other one qualifies for $700,000. What's the difference? The difference is that the one that qualifies for less has higher consumer debt, right? Car payment, student loan, credit card payment, other installment debt. And so it's really not, I can't answer the question in that way. I will say that in general, a lot of the conforming conventional FHA, VA product for single family through 4-unit programs require that the borrower not spend any more than between 43 and 50% of their gross monthly income on total debt. So what I normally do when I'm speaking to a client is I back into their number. I take their gross monthly income, I take 43% of that number, and then that represents the maximum debt that they can have. I subtract whatever their actual consumer debt is, that monthly number, and what's left is the maximum principal, interest, taxes, and insurance that they should be spending on a new purchase. So I kind of have to back into the transaction, and all programs have different debt to income requirements. Like jumbo lending, any loan that is above $822,000. In the height of COVID, you couldn't be spending more than 30, I think it was 36%. They went to old school guidelines from like 20 years ago where you had to really reduce your spending. Now more lenders have become more comfortable with the way that the market is moving. And so we're kind of back up to that 43 to 50%. But I also want to add this, within the context of the timelines for Topa, this 20-day and 30-day that they give the tenants an opportunity to figure out, if they're going to be able to buy, depending on who they're speaking to, their lender, it's 24 to 48 hours, quite frankly, to find out whether or not you qualify. You can have a very general, basic conversation, right, Mary? I mean, I'm not sure who's behind the scenes making it seem like it's a super complex situation. It's not that complex. What's your income? What's your credit? What's your consumer debt? How much assets do you have available? Do you need down payment assistance? Great. Here's what the numbers look like for you. And if it sounds interesting, what I tell my clients is great, go ahead and actually apply, complete the loan application. It's going to take them 20 minutes. It's all automated these days, right? There's no more handwritten applications. You complete your application. Now we're going to verify what you told me. Your income is this based on your pay stub, your W-2, your tax returns, if you're self-employed. We look at, your debt that is represented in the credit report. We verify everything. And then we offer you a pre-approval, which is a formal, way of saying, hey, we looked at everything. This is what you qualify for. Everything is now automated. It's a desktop underwriting tool that the residential mortgage lending space uses. Even though there are real underwriters involved, up front, when there's not been a property identified or whatever the case may be, we use an automated underwriting tool to determine what you qualify for. And of course, it's all based on data integrity. If I, as the loan associate, if I don't review your pay stubs accurately or your tax returns accurately, then, that could be, a bad situation. But in general, if it's data integrity, you run it through the tool, this is what you qualify for. So, 24 to 48 hours is as much time I think that someone needs. Now, obviously, you need to give people time to digest whether or not they want to buy. I think that's really the point. I'm a tenant. Do I really want to buy this property? Do I really want to live here? And so it might take them 20 days to come up with that situation, but not to get loan approved. It's not much time.
So Linnell, I want to follow up because I believe in the timeline, there was a distinction made about commercial loans versus, I guess, loans for single family.
Yep.
And can you explain what the cutoff is and what the difference is between a regular loan and a commercial loan?
So any property above 4 units is considered commercial. So a 5-unit apartment complex is considered commercial. And there's a whole other, world of financing for commercial lending. What we hear about in the news are all residential stuff, all the interest rates, this historically low rates. They're really speaking of residential lending. Obviously it certainly has something to do with the commercial space, but it's very, very different. There's more money involved. A lot of these low down payment programs are not available in the commercial lending space. More times than not, you have to come in with 30% down, depending on the size of the building. If we're talking about 50 units, 100 units, it's probably more like 50%. And John probably can speak more to that because, he's working with those types of clients on a regular basis. But for smaller scale, 1 to 4 family, it's really not a big deal to, get yourself into, a loan that's going to work for you, if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to do it, then you do something different.
What are the interest rates like on commercial loans these days? Is it different?
Oh yeah, they're definitely different because, for instance, FHA 30-year fixed, on a property, let's say it's $822,000 because that is FHA's max limit here in our marketplace. 2.75% is the 30-year fixed. 2.75, below 3%, it's great. Commercial lending is more than likely above 5%, 6%, right, John? There's a lot of factors that go, and it's been a long time since I've, handled any commercial lending, but I used to do commercial lending back in the day. And, there's a whole lot of dynamics that go into their rate. And it's not just about the borrower, it's the property and the whole economics of what it's going to produce. So it's a lot involved. And that is probably where you definitely need more time to figure out if you've got, 10 different tenants who are going to try to purchase a property together. It gets really, really complicated. And, to John's point, definitely real estate attorneys are going to be quite busy if this should come to pass. I know that it's a proposal at this point, but definitely there are some holes, as has been pointed out, some stuff that's missing. Scott has some input there.
Scott, before I recognize you, I want to go to Rashi. It seems like that in order to make this work, there will have to be subsidies from either local government or the state or the feds or whatever, but there will have to be subsidies to make this work, given the price of housing at the current market. Rashi, what is the estimate of how much this would cost the city to make it work?
Thank you, Councilmember Wengraf, for that question. I know it was in the Q&A as well. So the mayor's background report does acknowledge the importance of funding. I think Scott has spoken to this too about the DC program having significant resources to acquire properties. The mayor's background report, as I mentioned in my presentation, suggests a minimum of 10 to 15 million in city funds so that there are monies available for qualified nonprofits to acquire properties. That is one piece of the cost. There is also, as we noted in the presentation, implementation cost for the city, which will involve either the hiring of new staff or redirecting staff resources. I'm not aware of a specific estimate at this time for how many staff are needed, but that would be additional cost to the city. And then finally, one thing I didn't mention in my high-level presentation, but it's in the ordinance, is a concept of supportive partners. And some folks in the Q&A have asked, what types of resources will be available to tenants and owners. I think what is contemplated here is that there would be organizations who could become certified supportive partners. And there's a question, it's not clear to me in the ordinance who would fund those supportive partners to provide the assistance, but that may also be another source of cost as well.
Okay, thank you. And Scott, did you want to add something?
Sure, and actually it was a perfect segue for the Rashi's last point. I wanted to note the supportive partner aspect, that tenant organizations are required to work with a supportive partner. And I can say that in my previous job, when I was helping those several dozen tenant organizations through the Topa process, I was effectively working as a supportive partner. We call them community-based organizations here. And I helped with expertise on shepherding them through the process, like the different timelines and requirements, and in dealings with developers and things like that. And so we received, my organization that I worked for back then, received funding from the district government, and the district government's been doing this since about 2005, 2006. To provide this kind of technical assistance. And it's relatively low cost compared to lawyers, given what organizers make, but they're committed folks. And that is really essential to helping tenants navigate this process. It's sort of the same role that, say, a realtor would play in helping, if you're buying a home, helping you navigate the ins and outs of a complex process.
Okay, thank you. We're getting up upon our closing time. I just wonder if you would like to make a very brief closing statement regarding Topa. Anybody? Rashi? John?
Well, I just want to remind folks that there are multiple ways to share your input, and we appreciate the questions that we received. And I thought this was a really excellent conversation. So I want to thank our panelists and hope that we can convene a similar panel in the future. I will work on the bar chart. We will post the presentation. And please, everyone, remember the next opportunity to provide public comment on this policy is May 20th, which is next Thursday at 10:30 a.m. at the Land Use Policy Committee. That is a weekday. So if you are busy, you can also always email either the mayor directly, because this is his proposal, or the full council. And if you have specific questions for me or Councilmember Wengraf, you can always email us as well. Our email addresses, I won't spell them out, but they're on the City of Berkeley website.
Thank you, Rashi. John?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what has been said, which is, there's a lot of education, I think, that needs to be put forth both on the tenant side and the owner side and the real estate community as a whole. And as I said before, acceptance, grudging though it may be, is only going to come when there's clarity and predictability and certainty as to outcomes. And I think while this is a good yeoman start, there are many questions that still require answers that I think should be clarified to at least minimize the amount of time and resources that are going to be wasted litigating questions that could be answered before the law is implemented. So
Thank you very much. Mary?
Yeah, I think I like John's comment very much, and particularly really enjoyed, Linnell, learning from you, and could not agree more that figuring out what people are able to buy in terms of capacity financially isn't going to take 60 to 120 days. And I think as a matter of fairness to the owners who are being, the good ones anyway, I don't know how you distinguish legal agents, the good guys and the bad guys. That's another subject, but they're being put through a very long, uncertain process with long timelines in it. Why can't we move the determination of what the residents are able to buy to the front end and at least provide a hurdle at that point to see if it's worth pursuing? Because if they're way out of line with, what the owner desires as a price, that could save everybody a lot of time and agony.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Scott?
Sure. I guess I'd like to end with referring back to something that Mary mentioned earlier about limited equity co-ops and their ability to survive. And I'll generalize it to in questions about opportunity to purchase programs, tenant capability is often brought up. Can tenants really figure these things out? Can tenants really carry these things through? And I will note that I live in a condominium. I'm the vice president of my condo association. And my condo association, in one of the more well-off places in the country, has just as many difficulties of personality and errant decision-making as any limited equity cooperative ever did. And that I would say that I've known lots of developers, and developers make as many misguided and impulsive decisions as tenant groups will make. It's like the stock market, like there's a lot of emotion involved in things. And so don't undercount tenants' ability. But to go along with what others have said, it is very important, and what I referred to earlier, it is very important for tenants to have the technical support and guidance from people who do know the process well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Linnell?
I would totally agree. Ditto, 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 ditto. And if you visit the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau's website, it's a fantastic resource. If you put into the search, buying a house, tools and resources for home buyers comes up. And this is a site that came up out of, born out of the mortgage meltdown crisis back in 2008 and 2009. And, no one has any excuse to not have the information, to not access the information. If you think you might be interested in purchasing, I mean, Topa is on the, it's not an ordinance as yet, right? But if it should come to pass, there's no reason to wait until it does to figure out if you may be interested in buying the property that you live in. And so you might as well start now and check out that website. It has nothing to do with where I work. It's an agency or whatever, but it's a really good resource. And yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for participating. I'd like to think of this as Topo 101. And I think there are more questions than there are answers at this point. There are 102 questions in the chat. We didn't get to all of them, but I very much appreciate them, and I will go through them. And if I have the email addresses of the questioners, I will try to respond to them. I don't have all the answers myself, so. I want to thank you again. I think this was quite informative, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for the
Thank you.
invitation.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Good luck, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Ah,
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nice meeting y'all.
Thank you.
Otherwise.